When my boss Rebecca told me I wasn't leadership material during my performance review, I smiled and nodded like I always did. What she didn't know was that 18 months later, I would own the leadership consulting firm she desperately hired to save her failing division. But let me tell you how a quiet project coordinator became the woman who literally bought her way to the top. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams when Rebecca called me in for what she labeled a, quote, career development conversation. I wore my lucky blazer, the charcoal one that made me feel professional and put together. The meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes, which seemed promising. Maybe this was finally the promotion discussion I'd been waiting for. Rebecca sat behind the polished oak table with her signature red lipstick and power suit, flanked by Marcus from HR, who kept adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses nervously. The PowerPoint on the wall read growth opportunities in bold blue letters, and for a moment, my heart lifted. "Emma, thank you for joining us," Rebecca began, her voice carrying that syrupy tone she used when delivering bad news wrapped in corporate speak. "We wanted to discuss your trajectory here at Morrison Financial Services." I leaned forward slightly, pen ready to take notes on whatever development plan they had in mind. After 3 years of managing complex client portfolios and coordinating million-dollar projects flawlessly, I felt ready for the next step. "We've been observing your work closely," Marcus chimed in, reading from his tablet like he was delivering a prepared statement. "Your technical skills are undeniably strong, and your attention to detail is appreciated." The word "but" hung in the air before Rebecca even said it. "But," she continued, clasping her hands together, "leadership isn't just about managing tasks. It's about presence, about commanding respect, about having that natural authority that makes people want to follow you." My pen stopped moving across the notepad. The room suddenly felt smaller. After careful consideration and discussion with the leadership team, Rebecca said, glancing at Marcus for support, "We've decided that while you're an excellent individual contributor, you're just not leadership material. Some people are born leaders, Emma. Others are born to support them." The words hit like ice water. Not leadership material. In 3 years, I had never missed a deadline, never lost a client, never failed to deliver results that exceeded expectations. I had mentored new hires, streamlined processes that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maintained client satisfaction rates that consistently topped 95%. "We are, however, promoting you to Senior Project Coordinator," Marcus added quickly, as if the new title would soften the blow. "It comes with a modest salary increase and recognition of your valuable contributions to the team." I looked at the promotion letter they slid across the table. Senior Project Coordinator. The same role I'd been doing for 2 years, just with a fancier title and a 3% raise that barely covered inflation. "What about the team lead position that opened up in client relations?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "I applied for that role 6 weeks ago." Rebecca's expression shifted to what I called her patient teacher look, the one she used when explaining things to people she considered intellectually inferior. "Emma, that position requires someone who can inspire teams, make tough decisions under pressure, and represent our company at the executive level. It requires gravitas." She paused, letting the words settle like dust. "You're wonderful at following instructions and executing plans, but leadership means creating the vision others follow. It means having that indefinable quality that makes people listen when you speak." "I see," I said quietly, folding my hands in my lap. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This doesn't mean you can't contribute meaningfully to the organization. Support roles are crucial, Emma. The company needs people who are content to do excellent work behind the scenes. Content to do excellent work behind the scenes." The phrase echoed in my mind as I sat there, maintaining the same pleasant expression I'd worn when I walked in. They weren't just denying me a promotion, they were placing a ceiling over my entire career, telling me that my highest aspiration should be to remain invisible while others took credit for the results I produced. We understand this might be disappointing, Rebecca continued, her tone shifting to what she probably thought was empathetic. But self-awareness is important in professional development. Knowing your strengths and limitations is actually a sign of maturity. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing wisdom instead of insult. I appreciate your honesty, I said, signing the promotion paperwork with a steady hand. Is there anything specific I could work on to develop these leadership qualities you mentioned? Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. Well, Rebecca said carefully, some things can be learned, but natural leadership presence is largely innate. You could certainly take some courses, read some books, but… She trailed off with a shrug that said everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The meeting ended with handshakes and hollow congratulations on my promotion. I walked back to my desk with the same measured pace I always used, greeting colleagues with the same warm smile that had become my trademark. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a cup of chamomile tea and a legal pad, writing down everything I remembered from the conversation. Not because I planned to file a complaint or cause drama, but because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt to have my potential dismissed so casually. My mother's voice echoed in my memory from a conversation we'd had years earlier when I was struggling through graduate school. "Emma," she had said, "the world will constantly try to tell you who you are and what you're capable of. But the most successful people are the ones who decide for themselves and then prove it." I opened my laptop and began researching leadership development programs, not because I believed Rebecca's assessment, but because I wanted to understand what qualities they thought I lacked. I found executive coaching certifications, strategic thinking workshops, and advanced communication courses. But more importantly, I discovered something that made my pulse quicken. Morrison Financial Services had hired Pinnacle Leadership Solutions 6 months ago for a $250,000 contract to help develop I spent the next week observing differently. Instead of simply executing my tasks, I watched the dynamics around me with the analytical mind that had made me successful in project management. I noticed how Rebecca commanded meetings not through expertise but through volume and interruption. I saw how Marcus used corporate jargon to mask his lack of concrete knowledge. I observed how the natural leaders they praised often took credit for ideas that originated from their teams. The Pinnacle leadership consultant, a polished man named David Sterling, came in every Thursday to conduct, leadership assessments and, strategic visioning sessions. I watched him from my desk as he walked through the office in his expensive suit, carrying a leather portfolio, and speaking in measured, authoritative tones that seemed to hypnotize management. During lunch breaks, I began researching David Sterling and Pinnacle Leadership Solutions. What I found was fascinating. The company was barely 5 years old, founded by former corporate executives who had been laid off during the 2020 restructuring wave. Their client list was impressive, but not insurmountable. Their methodology was solid but not revolutionary. Most importantly, their financial statements were publicly available, and they painted an interesting picture. Pinnacle was profitable but not wildly successful. They had grown too quickly, taking on debt to expand their consultant roster before they had the client base to support it. They were competent but vulnerable, successful but not indispensable. I began staying late at the office, not to impress anyone, but to have quiet time to think and plan. The building emptied after 6, leaving only the security guards and the hum of computers running overnight processes. I would sit at my desk with a cup of coffee from the break room, thinking about Rebecca's words and what they really meant. Not leadership material. The phrase had stopped stinging and started motivating. I started a private document on my personal laptop, a running analysis of every leadership decision I witnessed, every missed opportunity I saw, every problem that could have been solved more efficiently. I noted how Rebecca's team consistently missed deadlines because she insisted on micromanaging details instead of trusting her staff's expertise. I documented how Marcus's department had the highest turnover rate in the company because he treated professionals like children who needed constant supervision. Rebecca had convinced the executive committee to bring in Pinnacle Leadership Solutions for a comprehensive leadership audit and development program. The contract was worth $400,000, and David Sterling was promising to identify high-potential leaders and create development pathways that would solve their succession problems. I sat in the back of the conference room during Sterling's presentation, watching him deliver the same generic slides I had seen countless times before. He talked about leadership presence and executive gravitas and natural authority, the same meaningless phrases that had been used to dismiss my potential years earlier. But what struck me most was how completely he misunderstood Morrison's actual challenges. He was focused on abstract leadership qualities when the real problem was systemic, a culture that valued perception over performance and politics over competence. No amount of leadership training would fix that fundamental dysfunction. During the break, I approached Janet Morrison, the company founder's daughter who now served as CEO. I had worked with Janet on several projects over the years, and she had always been more perceptive than the rest of the leadership team. "Janet," I said quietly, "can I share an observation about the succession challenge?" She nodded, stepping away from the crowd around the coffee station. "The leadership potential exists within the organization already," I said, "but the current assessment methods are missing it because they're measuring the wrong qualities. You're not lacking future leaders. You're failing to recognize the ones you already have." Janet studied my face with interest. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a simple analysis I had prepared, mapping Morrison's most critical business results over the past 3 years against the people who had actually driven those outcomes. The correlation was striking. The employees producing the best results were rarely the ones being groomed for leadership roles. "This is fascinating," Janet said, scrolling through the data. "Do you have more detailed analysis?" "I have a complete assessment methodology that identifies authentic leadership potential based on performance rather than personality," I replied. "But it's not something I developed for Morrison." That conversation led to a private meeting the following week, where I presented the full Catalyst leadership development approach to Janet and 2 other board members. I walked them through case studies from our technology client, demonstrated our assessment tools, and outlined how our methodology could solve Morrison's succession crisis more effectively than Pinnacle's generic approach. The presentation lasted 2 hours, and by the end, Janet was asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and pricing structures. "Emma," she said finally, "this is exactly what we need. But I have to ask, why haven't you brought this to us before? Why develop this outside the company?" The question hung in the air, like an accusation and an opportunity rolled into one. "Because," I said carefully, "I was told I wasn't leadership material. I was told that some people are born leaders, and others are born to support them. So I decided to prove that assessment wrong by creating a company that helps organizations find the leaders they didn't know they had." Janet's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching embarrassment. "When were you told that?" 2 years ago, during a performance review with Rebecca. It was suggested that I should be content to do excellent work behind the scenes." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Janet knew my track record at Morrison. She had personally commended my work on the Hartwell recovery and several other high-profile successes. The disconnect between that performance and Rebecca's assessment was impossible to ignore. "What would it take," Janet asked slowly, "for Catalyst to take over the leadership development contract instead of Pinnacle?" That question changed everything. Negotiating the contract required careful maneuvering. Pinnacle had already signed agreements and begun preliminary assessments. Breaking that relationship would require cause, and cause required demonstrating superior methodology and results. I proposed a pilot program. Catalyst would conduct parallel assessments on a small group of managers, using our performance-based approach alongside Pinnacle's traditional methods. The results would speak for themselves, and Morrison could choose which firm to work with based on actual outcomes rather than promises. Janet agreed, though she insisted the pilot be conducted confidentially to avoid disrupting the existing Pinnacle relationship. The pilot group consisted of 12 mid-level managers from different divisions, including several people Rebecca had identified as lacking leadership potential. I designed assessments that measured strategic thinking, problem-solving capability, influence without authority, and results under pressure, the real indicators of leadership effectiveness. The results were revelatory. 3 people Rebecca had dismissed as, quote, not ready for management roles, scored in the top tier for leadership potential based on actual performance metrics. Meanwhile, 2 managers she had fast-tracked for promotion showed significant gaps in strategic thinking and team influence. More importantly, the Catalyst assessments included specific development recommendations for each individual, based on their actual strengths and growth areas, rather than generic leadership competencies. When Janet reviewed the comparative results, her decision was immediate. She terminated the Pinnacle contract and awarded the full leadership development engagement to Catalyst Leadership Development. The announcement was made during the next all-hands meeting, with Janet explaining that Morrison was partnering with an innovative leadership development firm for a comprehensive succession planning initiative. I watched from my usual seat in the middle of the auditorium as she described the new approach, emphasizing how it would identify leadership potential throughout the organization based on actual performance and contribution rather than traditional indicators. Rebecca was sitting in the front row, her expression carefully neutral as she processed the implications. She didn't yet know that the consultant who would be assessing her team's leadership potential was the same person she had dismissed as not leadership material. That revelation came the following Monday, when I walked into Morrison's executive conference room wearing a navy business suit and carrying the leather portfolio that had become my signature accessory. I wasn't there as Emma, the senior project coordinator, anymore. I was there as Emma Davidson, managing director of Catalyst Leadership Development. The moment Rebecca saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, something approaching panic. "Emma," she said weakly, "I thought you were still working here." "I am," I replied calmly, taking my seat at the head of the conference table. "I'm working here as your leadership development consultant. I'll be conducting assessments of your entire management team and making recommendations about succession planning and promotion readiness." The irony was perfect. The woman who had told me I wasn't qualified to lead a team was now being evaluated by me for her own leadership effectiveness. Marcus from HR was there too, looking confused and uncomfortable. "I don't understand," he said. "You work in project coordination. How are you suddenly a consultant?" "I've been building Catalyst Leadership Development for the past 2 years," I explained. "While working here, I identified systemic problems in how organizations assess and develop leadership potential. Morrison has contracted with us to solve those problems." I opened my laptop and began the presentation that would redefine leadership development at Morrison. The first slide showed performance data I had been collecting for 3 years: metrics on project success rates, client satisfaction scores, team productivity measures, and innovation indicators. Traditional leadership assessments focus on presence, communication style, and perceived authority. I began. But research shows these factors have minimal correlation with actual leadership effectiveness. What matters is the ability to drive results, develop others, and create sustainable value for the organization. I clicked to the next slide, which showed Morrison's leadership development spending over the past 5 years, alongside employee engagement scores and succession readiness metrics. "You've invested over $2 million in leadership development during this period," I continued. "Yet succession readiness has declined, and engagement scores have remained flat. This suggests a fundamental problem with how leadership potential is identified and developed." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She knew where this was heading. The next hour was a masterclass in strategic consulting, if I do say so myself. I walked them through case studies, showing how performance-based leadership assessment had transformed other organizations. I demonstrated our proprietary tools for identifying authentic leadership potential. Most importantly, I showed them what they had been missing. Using carefully anonymized examples from Morrison's own workforce, I revealed how many high-potential leaders had been overlooked because they didn't fit traditional leadership profiles. People who led through competence rather than charisma, who influenced through expertise rather than authority, who drove results through collaboration rather than command and control management. The presentation concluded with a comprehensive plan for transforming Morrison's approach to leadership development, complete with timelines, success metrics, and expected outcomes. When I finished, Janet spoke first. "This is exactly what we need. When can you start the full assessment process?" "Immediately," I replied. "I'll begin with individual assessments of the current leadership team, followed by identification of high-potential employees throughout the organization." Rebecca finally found her voice. "Emma, I have to say, this is impressive work. I had no idea you were developing this expertise." I met her gaze directly. "Rebecca, you told me 2 years ago that some people are born leaders, and others are born to support them. You said I should be content to do excellent work behind the scenes. I want to thank you for that conversation, because it motivated me to prove that leadership can be developed, demonstrated, and recognized when you know what to look for." The silence that followed was deafening. Over the next 3 months, I conducted comprehensive assessments of Morrison's entire management structure. The process was thorough, objective, and revelatory. Several people Rebecca had identified as high potential showed significant gaps in actual leadership capability. Meanwhile, employees she had dismissed or overlooked demonstrated clear evidence of strategic thinking, influence, and results-driven performance. The most satisfying assessment was Rebecca's own evaluation. Using the same performance-based methodology I applied to everyone else, I documented her leadership effectiveness across multiple dimensions: strategic vision, team development, results achievement, and organizational impact. The data told a clear story. While Rebecca excelled at presentation and political maneuvering, she struggled with the fundamentals of effective leadership. Her team had the highest turnover rate in the company. Projects under her direction consistently ran over budget and behind schedule. Client satisfaction scores for her division were below company average. Most damaging was the 360-degree feedback from her direct reports, which revealed a pattern of micromanagement, credit-taking, and dismissive treatment of subordinates' ideas. The final report I delivered to Janet was comprehensive, objective, and damning. Based on my assessment, I recommended that Rebecca be moved to an individual contributor role focused on business development, where her presentation skills could be valuable without the negative impact of her management approach. I also identified 3 high-potential leaders within her division who were ready for expanded responsibilities. One of those recommendations was particularly satisfying. I had identified Marcus from HR as having exceptional leadership potential based on his strategic thinking, collaborative approach, and track record of developing others. The same Marcus who had sat in that performance review 2 years earlier, reading from his tablet about my supposed limitations. Janet implemented every recommendation in my report. Rebecca was reassigned to a senior business development role, officially described as a promotion but clearly understood as a demotion. Marcus was promoted to Director of Human Resources Development, with responsibility for implementing our new leadership identification and development processes. The day Rebecca cleaned out her management office, she stopped by my temporary workspace in the conference room. "Emma," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your leadership potential." I looked up from my laptop, where I was preparing the final implementation report that would conclude our engagement with Morrison. "Rebecca," I replied calmly, "you weren't wrong about my leadership potential. You were wrong about what leadership potential looks like. You were looking for the wrong qualities and measuring the wrong outcomes." She nodded slowly, understanding the distinction. "For what it's worth," she continued, "watching you build this company while working here, seeing you prove everyone wrong, it's been humbling. You've shown what real leadership looks like." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, looking out at the office where I had spent 4 years being underestimated and overlooked. In 3 months, I had not just proven my leadership capability, I had redefined how the organization thought about leadership itself. But the Morrison contract was just the beginning. Word of our success spread quickly through Elena's network and the business community. Catalyst Leadership Development was soon fielding inquiries from companies across the region, all facing similar challenges with identifying and developing authentic leadership talent. Within a year, we had grown to a team of 8 consultants and were generating over $2 million in annual revenue. More importantly, we were transforming how organizations thought about leadership development, moving beyond superficial assessments to performance-based evaluation and development. The ultimate vindication came 18 months later, when Pinnacle Leadership Solutions reached out about a potential merger. David Sterling, the consultant who had dismissed Morrison's internal talent while charging premium rates for generic solutions, now wanted to partner with the company I had built. During our meeting at Pinnacle's downtown offices, Sterling explained how the market was shifting toward more performance-based approaches to leadership development. "Your methodology is exactly what clients are demanding now," he said. "We'd like to discuss acquiring Catalyst or potentially merging our organizations." I listened politely as he outlined various partnership scenarios, all of which would result in Catalyst being absorbed into Pinnacle's larger operation. When he finished, I smiled and delivered the response I had been waiting years to give. "David, I appreciate the interest, but we're not looking for a partnership. However, I do have a counterproposal." I slid a folder across the table containing due diligence information I had compiled on Pinnacle's financial situation. "Based on our analysis, Pinnacle has grown too quickly and taken on more debt than your client base can support sustainably. Your methodology, while adequate, hasn't evolved with market demands. Your client retention rates are declining, and your profit margins are under pressure." Sterling's expression shifted from confident to concerned. As he reviewed the documents, "We'd like to acquire Pinnacle Leadership Solutions," I continued. "We'll retain your existing consultants who meet our methodology standards, honor current client contracts, and integrate your back-office operations into our growing platform." The acquisition closed 4 months later. Catalyst Leadership Development purchased Pinnacle for significantly less than they had hoped to sell for, but more than their debt-laden balance sheet could command from other buyers. The press release announcing the acquisition included a quote from me that summarized the journey perfectly. "This acquisition represents our commitment to transforming the leadership development industry by focusing on authentic capability rather than superficial characteristics. We believe every organization has untapped leadership potential. It just requires the right assessment methodology to identify and develop it." Rebecca reached out after seeing the announcement, asking if we could meet for coffee. She had been following Catalyst's growth and wanted to congratulate me personally on the acquisition. We met at the same cafe where I had once discussed my executive MBA program with Sarah Chen, back when I was still trying to prove myself within Morrison's constraints. "Emma," Rebecca said, stirring her latte thoughtfully, "I've been thinking a lot about that conversation we had 2 years ago. About leadership material and natural authority and all those things I said." I waited, curious about where she was heading. I realize now that I was describing performance, not leadership. I was looking for people who could command a room, who had that executive presence, who fit the traditional model of what leaders look like. She paused, meeting my eyes directly. "But what you've built, what you've accomplished, that's actual leadership. You saw a problem, developed a solution, built an organization, and transformed an entire industry approach. You did it without anyone's permission or approval, and you proved that leadership isn't about fitting someone else's definition. It's about creating value and driving change." I smiled, appreciating her honesty. "Rebecca, you gave me exactly what I needed, even though neither of us realized it at the time. You showed me that waiting for recognition wasn't a strategy. You motivated me to stop asking for opportunities and start creating them instead." 3 years after that devastating performance review, I was running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm that had redefined leadership development for dozens of organizations. More importantly, I was helping other overlooked employees discover and develop their own leadership potential. The best part wasn't the financial success or industry recognition, though both were satisfying. The best part was the emails I received from people whose careers had been transformed by our assessment methodology. Talented professionals who had been told they weren't leadership material, and now found themselves in executive roles driving change and creating value. Because that's what real leadership development looks like. Not teaching people to fit someone else's definition of authority, but helping them recognize and develop the authentic capabilities they already possess. Rebecca was right about one thing in that original performance review. Some people are natural leaders, but she was completely wrong about what that means. Natural leadership isn't about commanding presence or executive gravitas. It's about seeing problems others miss, developing solutions others can't imagine, and persisting until you prove that the impossible was just improbable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.